It was a typical afternoon in Washington, D.C. The air was thick with political tension as the corridors of the Capitol echoed with the steps of powerful figures rushing between meetings and debates. At the heart of this political storm stood Pam Bondi, the United States Attorney General under President Donald Trump. Bondi, a fierce and unyielding advocate for the administration, had long been known for her sharp wit, fearless rhetoric, and unrelenting pursuit of justice. However, no one could have predicted that the seemingly calm surface of her career would soon ripple with a revelation so explosive that it would shake the very foundations of the American legal system. Pam Bondi had always been an astute strategist, carefully navigating the complex web of politics in Washington. She knew how to play the game, where to strike, and when to remain silent. But silence was no longer an option. The whispers had started months ago, rumors that something was amiss within the ranks of the judicial branch, a deal that involved a name that had become synonymous with the conservative movement, Judge Amy Coney Barrett. Barrett, appointed by President Trump to the Supreme Court, had been hailed as a rising star in the judicial world. Her confirmation had been a triumph for conservatives who saw in her a steadfast defender of the Constitution. But as with all great figures in politics, there were whispers of shadows behind the brilliance. People had noticed the way she carried herself, the subtle exchanges with political elites, the private meetings that seemed to occur behind closed doors. And one name kept cropping up in the hushed conversations: Pam Bondi. It was a hot, muggy morning when Bondi received the call that would change everything. She had been summoned to a private meeting at a discreet location, one of the many secure government offices known only to those who needed to know. As she entered the building, she was greeted by a group of high-ranking officials, their faces grave with concern. It was clear that this was no ordinary meeting. "Pam, we need you to hear this," one of the officials said as he slid a file across the table. "This is the information you've been waiting for." Bondi took a deep breath as she opened the file. Her eyes scanned the documents in front of her, her mind racing to connect the dots. The evidence was damning. A secret deal had been struck between Judge Amy Coney Barrett and a group of powerful political figures. The specifics were unclear, but the implications were enormous. If this deal went public, it could destroy Barrett's career and leave the judicial branch in ruins. But why was Bondi being brought into this? She was not a member of the judiciary, she was the Attorney General. Her job was to enforce the law, not to uncover judicial secrets. Yet, as she read through the documents, it became clear why she had been chosen. Bondi was the only one who could expose this scandal. She had the political clout, the connections, and the determination to take down anyone who threatened the integrity of the Trump administration. The room fell silent as Bondi processed the information. She knew the risks. She knew that exposing this secret deal would make her an enemy of many powerful figures. But she also knew that the truth had to come out. This was bigger than any one person. This was about the integrity of the judicial system. "I'll do it," Bondi said, her voice steady but resolute. "I'll expose it. The world deserves to know the truth." The officials nodded, their faces reflecting a mix of relief and apprehension. They had known that Bondi was the only one who could carry out such a task, but they also knew that the fallout would be immense. The political storm that would follow could bring down not just Barrett but also many of those who had supported her. Bondi left the meeting with a sense of purpose. She was no longer just a member of the Trump administration. She was about to become the central figure in a political scandal that would capture the nation's attention. As she walked through the streets of Washington, she could already hear the whispers. This was the beginning of something big. The days that followed were a blur for Pam Bondi. She spent hours going over the documents in the file, cross-referencing every detail, verifying sources, and preparing herself for the monumental task ahead. This wasn't just a political move, it was a full-scale battle. She knew that once the lid was lifted on the secret deal involving Judge Amy Coney Barrett, the political world would never be the same. The risk was enormous, but so was the potential for exposure. It wasn't long before Bondi found herself face-to-face with a major obstacle, the source of the leak. Someone within the system had given her the information, but who? Bondi had been in politics long enough to know that leaks of this magnitude weren't random. They were deliberate, carefully orchestrated. In private conversations with her closest allies, Bondi shared her concerns. "Someone wants this out," she told them. "But the question is why? And who?" Her investigation into the leak led her to several dead ends. But Bondi wasn't the type to back down. She pressed on, methodically sifting through contacts, political figures, and backroom dealings. As the days went by, she began to piece together the puzzle, but one question still haunted her. Why was the leak happening now? Why hadn't it come out sooner? Then came the first major piece of the puzzle. A former clerk of Judge Barrett's had contacted Bondi anonymously. This clerk, who had worked with Barrett during her time as a judge on the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, revealed shocking details about a meeting between Barrett and several high-ranking members of the political elite. The meeting had been held in secret, and it wasn't about legal matters. It was about political maneuvering, about power plays, and ultimately a deal that would guarantee Barrett's future. Barrett was approached by several political figures with an offer, the clerk had explained in their encrypted message. The deal was simple. If she played her cards right, she would secure her place on the Supreme Court for decades. In exchange, she had to make certain promises that had nothing to do with the law. As Bondi digested this information, the weight of it settled in. This wasn't just a simple political maneuver, this was a deal that could compromise the very integrity of the judicial system. And Barrett, the seemingly untouchable judge, was at the center of it. Bondi spent the following weeks preparing her strategy. The timing had to be perfect. She knew that if she went public too soon, the backlash would be swift and brutal. But if she waited too long, the truth might be buried forever. She needed to expose the deal, but she had to do it in a way that would force the nation to pay attention. One evening, as Bondi was sitting in her office reviewing her speech for the upcoming press conference, the phone rang. It was the last call she had been expecting. It was from a trusted ally, a journalist with connections deep inside the Capitol. "You need to see this," the journalist said, his voice low and urgent. "We have confirmation of the deal. Barrett's involvement isn't just a rumor, it's real." Bondi's heart raced as she listened. The journalist continued to explain how the leak had reached the press, how the whispers had grown louder, and how the public was now on the brink of discovering the truth. "The deal was made years ago," the journalist explained. "And it's much bigger than we thought. The whole country needs to know about it. If you expose this now, there's no going back." Bondi sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She knew what she had to do. The nation had to know the truth. The people deserved to know that their judicial system wasn't immune to corruption and influence. The following morning, as the sun rose over the Capitol, Bondi made her way to the podium, prepared for the most consequential moment of her career. The room was packed. Cameras flashed as journalists jockeyed for position, their microphones pointed directly at Pam Bondi as she stood before the podium. She could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her, the anticipation in the air so thick it was almost palpable. This wasn't just another press conference, this was the moment she had been preparing for. This was the revelation that would send shockwaves through Washington, D.C. and across the country. Bondi stood tall, her hands steady as she gripped the podium. She had carefully crafted her message, each word calculated to ensure maximum impact. She had chosen her words carefully. She had to strike the right balance between delivering the truth and maintaining her credibility. Once she spoke, there would be no turning back. The room fell silent as she began. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bondi's voice rang out, calm yet resolute, "I stand before you today not just as the Attorney General of the United States, but as a public servant who believes in the integrity of our justice system. Today, I am here to reveal a truth that has been buried for far too long." There was a pause as the journalists leaned in, their pens poised, waiting for what would come next. Judge Amy Coney Barrett, the current Supreme Court Justice, has been involved in a secret deal with several powerful political figures. A deal that compromises the very foundation of the judiciary and the principles of justice that we hold dear. Gasps rippled through the room. The words hung in the air, heavy with the gravity of their implications. Bondi could see the shock on the faces of the reporters, the disbelief in their eyes. This was not the story they had expected. This was not the news they had anticipated. She continued, her voice unwavering. "This deal was struck years ago, long before Barrett's nomination to the Supreme Court. It involved high-level political maneuvering, promises made behind closed doors, and assurances that Barrett would rule in favor of certain political interests in exchange for her elevation to the highest court in the land." The room was dead silent now, every reporter scribbling furiously, trying to capture every detail of the unfolding drama. Bondi knew she had their attention. But she also knew that what she had just revealed was only the tip of the iceberg. The specifics of this deal are clear. It involved certain promises that Barrett made to political elites, promises that have influenced her judicial decisions since her confirmation. These promises were not about upholding the law or ensuring justice, they were about securing power. And that power, as we all know, has consequences. Bondi paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. She could feel the weight of the information she had just laid bare. There was no going back now. This was bigger than any political scandal she had faced before. This was an attack on the very credibility of the Supreme Court. As Attorney General, it is my duty to uphold the Constitution and ensure that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law. And it is clear to me that the deal struck by Judge Barrett and her political allies constitutes a breach of the public trust. This is not just about one judge. It's about the integrity of our entire judicial system. At that moment, the room erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, clamoring for more details, for confirmation, for anything that would give them a clearer picture of the scandal that Bondi had just unveiled. But Bondi remained calm, her eyes locked on the sea of faces in front of her. "I understand that many of you will have questions," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "And I will answer them. But first, let me be clear, I did not make this decision lightly. I did not come to this conclusion without a thorough investigation. And I did not reveal this information for political gain. I revealed it because the American people deserve the truth. The American people deserve to know that their highest court is not a pawn in a political game." A reporter from the back of the room raised his hand, his voice shaking with disbelief. "Are you saying that Judge Barrett's decisions on the Supreme Court have been influenced by political deals?" Bondi's gaze was steady as she nodded. "Yes, that is exactly what I'm saying. And the implications of this go far beyond just Judge Barrett. This is about a system that has been corrupted, a system that is supposed to be impartial but has been hijacked by political interests." Another reporter stood up, her voice filled with skepticism. "How can you be so sure of this, Attorney General Bondi? What evidence do you have to back up these claims?" Bondi didn't flinch. "I have the evidence. I have the documents, the testimonies, and the records that show the deals made behind closed doors. And I will ensure that they are made public for all to see." The room buzzed with activity. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered among themselves, and the sound of typing keyboards filled the air. But in that moment, Bondi stood unshaken. She had just dropped a bombshell that would reverberate across the political landscape. The press conference had only just ended, but the aftermath was already unfolding before Pam Bondi's eyes. The impact of her revelation was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets scrambled to report the story, analyzing every word she had said, every detail she had unveiled. Social media erupted, with millions of Americans weighing in on the explosive scandal. The reaction was swift, and it came from all sides. Conservatives who had once hailed Judge Amy Coney Barrett as the perfect Supreme Court justice now found themselves in a difficult position. They had trusted her judgment, revered her conservative principles, but now they were faced with a harsh reality. If Bondi's allegations were true, the very foundation of Barrett's legitimacy as a judge could crumble. On the other hand, liberals and progressives who had long criticized Barrett's confirmation were quick to seize on the revelation. They saw it as confirmation of their worst fears. Barrett had been appointed not on merit, but on the strength of political deals and backroom promises. The notion that a judge's decisions could be influenced by political machinations was anathema to everything they believed in. But as the shockwaves spread through the media, one thing became clear. Pam Bondi had ignited a firestorm that couldn't be contained. The nation was in the midst of a full-scale political and legal crisis, and the consequences were just beginning to unfold. In Washington, the phone lines were burning. Politicians from both parties reached out to Bondi, some offering support, others seeking to distance themselves from the scandal. The White House was in damage control mode, trying to contain the fallout from the exposure of Barrett's secret deal. President Trump, who had appointed Barrett to the Supreme Court, had yet to comment publicly, but behind closed doors, his advisors were in panic mode. They knew that this was no ordinary scandal. It was an existential threat to the legitimacy of the entire administration. Bondi's phone rang constantly. Her political allies were calling to praise her bravery while her detractors were lining up to tear her down. But amidst all the chaos, Bondi remained focused. She had a clear mission now to make sure the truth came out regardless of the political cost. And she knew that the next step would be the hardest yet. A week after the press conference, Bondi was summoned to Capitol Hill. The Senate Judiciary Committee had called for a hearing, and Bondi was the key witness. The hearing was set to be a dramatic confrontation between Bondi and Judge Barrett, with the eyes of the nation watching. As Bondi walked into the hearing room, the atmosphere was tense. Lawmakers from both parties were present, some eager to grill her on the details of her claims, others hoping to discredit her and protect Barrett. Bondi sat at the witness table, her hands folded in front of her, her expression unwavering. She knew this was the moment that would define her career. Senator Lindsey Graham, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, called the session to order. His voice was firm, but there was an unmistakable undertone of unease. Attorney General Bondi, Graham began, "We are here today to examine the serious allegations you have made against Justice Barrett. The American people deserve answers, and we expect nothing less than the truth. You have made some very serious claims, now it's time to back them up. Are you prepared to do that?" Bondi nodded, her gaze steady. "I am ready, Senator. I stand by every word I've said. The evidence is clear, and it will be made available for all to see." The questions began almost immediately. Senators from both parties took turns questioning Bondi, each attempting to either defend or condemn Barrett, depending on their political leanings. Bondi answered each question with poise, never losing her composure even when the questions grew increasingly aggressive. "Can you provide us with any proof of this secret deal you've spoken of?" Senator Chuck Grassley asked, his voice skeptical. "Or are we simply to take your word for it?" Bondi's gaze was unwavering as she responded. "I have the documents, Senator. I have emails, meeting logs, and sworn testimonies that show the deal was real. And I will ensure that they are made public." The tension in the room was palpable. Some senators seemed to doubt Bondi's claims, while others were quietly preparing for the fallout that would follow if her allegations were proven true. Then it was time for Judge Barrett to testify. As she entered the room, the air seemed to grow colder. Barrett, calm and composed, sat at the witness table, her eyes focused straight ahead. She knew the stakes. This wasn't just a hearing. This was a battle for her career, her reputation, and her place on the highest court in the land. Senator Graham turned to Barrett. "Justice Barrett, you've heard the allegations that have been made against you. Can you provide any insight into the nature of the deal that has been described?" Barrett's voice was calm but firm as she responded. "I categorically deny any such deal ever took place. I have always acted with integrity, and my decisions as a judge have been based solely on the law, not on any political influence." The room was filled with murmurs as Barrett made her statement. But Bondi was not about to let the matter go. She had prepared for this moment, and she wasn't going to back down now. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing had reached a boiling point. The battle between Pam Bondi and Judge Amy Coney Barrett was no longer just about political allegiance or personal rivalry. It had become a matter of national importance. The integrity of the Supreme Court was on the line, and the American public was watching intently, waiting to see which side would come out victorious. As the questioning continued, Bondi remained calm but resolute. She had already made her case, and she wasn't about to let Barrett's denial go unanswered. "Justice Barrett," Bondi interjected, her voice cutting through the room, "you claim there was no deal, no backroom agreements, but the facts tell a different story. You may deny it now, but the documents don't lie. The emails, the meeting notes, the testimonies, they all point to one truth, that you made promises, political promises, in exchange for your position on the court." A murmur swept through the room as senators exchanged glances. Some looked skeptical, others appeared more convinced by Bondi's conviction. Bondi could feel the eyes of the nation on her, and she knew this was her moment to drive the point home. "Let's take a look at some of the evidence," Bondi continued, her voice unwavering. "This is an email from a high-ranking political figure dated just weeks before your nomination. It outlines certain assurances you made regarding your rulings on key issues, specifically issues that would benefit their political agenda. And these assurances weren't made in public, they were made in private, behind closed doors." Bondi held up a document for the committee to see. It was an email exchange, time-stamped and marked with the seal of authenticity. The senators leaned forward, eager to see the smoking gun that Bondi had just revealed. "I'll let the documents speak for themselves," Bondi said. "This email is just the beginning. There's more where this came from." The tension in the room was palpable. Barrett's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure, her eyes locked on Bondi. She could feel the walls closing in on her. She had never anticipated this level of scrutiny, never expected that the very foundation of her career could be threatened by something she had thought was long buried. Senator Dick Durbin, a Democrat from Illinois, stood up, his voice filled with a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Judge Barrett, you were appointed to the highest court in the land. Your confirmation was supposed to be a testament to your integrity and impartiality. But now we're hearing that your appointment may have been the result of political favors. How do you justify that?" Barrett's eyes flickered for a moment as if she was grappling with the weight of the question. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but strained. "I swear to you, Senator, I did not make any political promises. My decisions have always been based on the law, not on any personal or political interests. These documents you speak of, they're fabricated. They're part of a smear campaign meant to discredit me. But Bondi was ready. She had anticipated Barrett's denial and she had come prepared with the truth. She had witnesses and she had proof. I have witnesses who were present at the meetings, Bondi countered. Witnesses who will testify under oath that they were part of the discussions where these promises were made. I have people who can confirm that these political deals were real and that they were crucial to securing your position. At that moment, a former White House official who had been closely involved in Barrett's nomination process was brought in as a surprise witness. The official, a well-respected figure with decades of experience in the political arena, had agreed to testify despite the risks to their own career. The room fell silent as the witness took the stand. The official's name was never revealed, but their testimony sent shockwaves through the room. I was present at the meetings between Judge Barrett and political operatives during the confirmation process, the witness said, their voice steady but filled with gravitas. I can confirm that promises were made. These promises were not about interpreting the law fairly, they were about advancing a political agenda. I saw it with my own eyes. The room was stunned into silence. This was the moment the entire nation had been waiting for. The evidence that Bondi had promised had finally come to light, and it was damning. Senator Lindsey Graham, who had been carefully moderating the hearing, now appeared visibly shaken. He turned to Barrett, his voice a mix of disbelief and concern. Justice Barrett, you've heard the testimony. You've seen the documents. This is not just hearsay. This is not just speculation. This is real. What do you have to say for yourself now? Barrett's composure had finally cracked. She looked down, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edges of the witness table. For the first time since the hearing began, she seemed unsure of herself. Barrett began, but her voice faltered. She cleared her throat and tried again. I never intended to betray anyone. My goal was always to serve the people and uphold the Constitution. But if my actions have caused anyone to question my integrity, I deeply regret that. But the damage had already been done. The public trust had been broken. The American people had been sold a lie. Bondi, sensing that the tide had turned irrevocably in her favor, took a deep breath. She knew that the battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. The truth was out there now, and there was no denying it. We have all heard the testimony, Bondi said, her voice cutting through the tension. The facts are clear. This deal was real and it has compromised the integrity of the highest court in the land. It's time for accountability. It's time for the American people to have their faith in the justice system restored. The hearing continued for hours, but the momentum had shifted. It was no longer about defending Barrett, it was about uncovering the truth and holding those responsible accountable. By the time the session concluded, the scandal had become front-page news across the country. Pam Bondi had taken a monumental risk, but in the end it had paid off. The revelation of the secret deal between Barrett and political elites was no longer a whisper in the corridors of power, it was the story dominating headlines, the story that would define the next chapter in America's political history. And while the fight was far from over, Bondi knew one thing for certain: she had started a movement that would change the course of history.